Just wanted to say welcome to everybody here. We're going to wait about 30 seconds or so for people to show up, and then we'll get started fairly soon. So thank you. Okay, I think we will actually start now. This event is being recorded, which means we don't want too much dead air at the very beginning of that recording. I'd like to welcome everybody who's here. My name is David Simon. I'm a senior lecturer at the Jackson School of Global Affairs at Yale University and the director of the Genocide Studies program. We're delighted today to welcome Pavlina Pavlova, delivering her paper addressing the security risks of anti-Roma hate speech on social media. The webinar is part of an occasional seminar series sponsored by the Yale Genocide Studies program. And this one has two twists that we're particularly proud of at the Genocide Studies program and excited about. One is that it's connected to the GSP's fairly new initiative focusing on mass atrocities in the digital era. We call this MADE. And this initiative is based on the need to recalibrate the understanding of how genocide prevention, accountability, and memorialization operate in light of the internet, social media, and other digital technologies. The second thing that's sort of unique and exciting about this is that the paper that will be presented will soon be posted as a MADE working paper, number 4 in the series, on our website, which you can find at gsp.yale.edu. And it's also the first outside paper, a paper by a non-Yale author to be published within this series. We hope to have many more, and we hope that our working paper series will be a sort of place to engage in this conversation of where and how genocide studies and other efforts to understand genocide and other mass atrocities are influenced by digital technologies. Our guest and our presenter today is Pavlina Pavlova. She's a public policy advisor at the CyberPeace Institute, where she focuses on security, human rights, governance, and international law in cyberspace. She's previously been a consultant with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And by the way, I'll let her describe a little bit more of her background, because it's quite significant and related to the topic itself. But I will just add that Pavlina holds a master's degree from the University of Leuven in Belgium, and that she's active in many networks, including the Women in International Security STEM Women Network based in Poland, the Harvard Kennedy School's Women in Defense, Diplomacy, and Development mentoring program, and the Slovak Republic's Security Academy. Without further ado, then, I'm going to turn it over to Pavlina. One bit of further ado, which is a note on the format here. Pavlina is going to be presenting her paper. I understand she has some extensive PowerPoint notes to go along with it. But she's also offered to sort of pause occasionally for questions. Those in the audience may use the Q&A function or the chat function to post questions, or they may raise their hands using the raise hand function on the webinar during those moments when there's a pause to take questions. But if you just queue them up in Q&A or in the chat, then I can help moderate those questions at those moments when Ms. Pavlova will be sort of disposed to take them. Okay, now without further ado, but with tremendous gratitude for having her be willing to appear at this forum, I turn it over to Pavlina Pavlova. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm extremely honored to present my paper today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. And I will start with some personal introduction, as it was mentioned, because I found it very important for the research to see the motivation which led to it. And then I will introduce the paper and the different sections. And after each section, I will stop for questions, but also feel free to just chime in with your comments, so we make it into more of a discussion. So the title of the paper today is Addressing the Security Risk of Anti-Roma Hate Speech on Social Media Platforms. And how did this paper come to life? For 3 years, I've been working at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. And OSCE has a comprehensive approach to security. It's based on three dimensions: the political and military, economic and environmental, and the human dimension of security. And human security is a key concept for this dimension. So I've been working on the security component of human rights, equipping human rights defenders, especially of Roma nationality, with the tools and knowledge to address the issues related to their physical, psychological, and digital security. I've been advising, coordinating capacity building programs, providing expertise on publications, but also identifying cases of human rights abuses and hate crimes, and monitoring and analyzing the human rights situations in the OSCE area, and flagging emerging challenges and trends which had potential to become hate crimes or violations, and advising on the response that the institution should take. And we'll speak about these inflammatory events later on. So this work led to identifying the need to write about the specific risk and harms that content on social media can have on Roma communities. I also come from Eastern Slovakia. Slovakia, as such, has approximately 8 to 10% of Romani population, which is mostly living in the eastern and southeastern part of the country. So before my secondment to the OSCE, I was also shortly staying with the Office of Plenipotentiary for Roma Communities. So as you see from my personal motivation, this topic is very close to my heart. When it comes to the research itself, and now I will start sharing my presentation. I hope you can all see it. It examines hate speech and its associated risks for human security. It's focusing on user-generated content, targeting Roma, and related content moderation standards, tools, processes, and practices. So the paper itself is a whole journey through what is happening in speech on social media platforms relevant to Roma, to what is the response from social media platforms, different tools, practices, and then to recommendations. When it comes to content moderation, it's understood as the organized practice of screening user-generated content posted on social media to determine the appropriateness of the content for a particular platform, locality, context, and jurisdiction. So these are the main definitions. And the reasoning behind the research itself is that while there have been broad discussions around the impacts of social media on many aspects of our lives, such as democracy, and especially on election interference and free speech related to it, this has been particularly taking place in the past 2-3 years. And these kind of considerations enter in mainstream discourse. However, the implications for certain minority and marginalized groups and the associated risks have yet to be investigated within the framework of content moderation, platform governance, etc. So these knowledge gaps hinders effective responses to the historical discrimination toward minority communities that in many places found new channels over social media platforms. As a result, hateful and racist expressions and incitement to hatred, violence, or even genocide against minority groups continues to go largely unaddressed in online spaces. And here you can see on the slide the aim of the research. It seeks to illustrate how decisions on online content impact human security of Roma in Europe, but also how tackling anti-Roma hate speech on social media platforms can inform models of content moderation globally. Some things are very specific for Roma in Europe, and I will explain right away why I picked this ethnicity beyond having background in it, but why I find it instrumental for research on content moderation. But some lessons which are being outlined today can be taken further, because many of these issues are shared among other marginalized groups and other minorities in other areas, not only in Europe. Romani people, and here on the slide you can see the official Romani flag. Why the focus on Romani people? The term, by the way, Roma, is applied as an umbrella for various groups. It's by no means to say it's a homogeneous group. There are many groups within this umbrella word, some of which are using the self-designation Roma, while others are labeled with different ethonyms. Especially one of the well-known groups is Sinti, but there are many others across Europe and beyond. So Roma have experience which can be shared with other minority groups and can be taken further for especially for policy making or content moderation. But why Roma example is so important? Because they have been selected as a minority group which find itself on the sharp end of content moderation decisions. Romani people have experienced historical and systemic racism, discrimination, and exclusion. And they faced prejudices, stereotypes, and hostility across countries. Actually, when we are looking into surveys across different countries, they will be the most unpopular group across Europe from different minorities. But these negative attitudes are also perpetuated, broadcast, and intensified in online spaces in the form of hateful and racist speech or incitement to violence. And we can see that cases of community and other violence have been spread over social media platforms. And if time permitted, I will mention some of the examples. While I have to say that the connection between the correlation between online speech and offline violence have not been conclusively proven yet. But there are strong indication there is such correlation in these crimes online and offline. Before we dive further into the research, I wanted to state clearly what is understood here under hate speech. So there is no international legal definition of hate speech, and the classification of what constitutes hateful expressions remains disputed. This is due to its complexity and versatility. Hate speech can be approached from different standpoints, such as legal, linguistic, psychological, sociological, or security, as I'm mostly attempting in my research. Hate speech then refers to a heterogeneous set of manifestation. And these are ranging, and this is very, very important for content moderation and also how content moderation correlates or answers to current policy initiatives, whether in like European Union initiatives or other regional initiatives or in national legislation, because hate speech can range from criminal acts to speech that is offensive and disturbing, but not necessarily banned as unlawful. And we can say about like awful but lawful speech. And I will be importantly also pointing to that awful speech, which is present, which is not necessarily unlawful, but it's having important security and human rights impacts for the targeted groups. When it comes to content moderation of hate speech, just some main points which are being raised constantly when we are speaking about this issue. Acting on hate speech is raised as finding an uneasy balance between two fundamental rights in conflict, and it's freedom of speech and prohibition of discrimination. And how is it being balanced can depend on many different things, such as the political situation, historical situation, social context, etc. In content moderation, social media calibrates conflicting demands and set the right lines of what expressions need to be limited or removed. However, user-generated content that remains present on the platforms despite violating community standards reveals a problematic and piecemeal implementation of these standards. A very short dive into methodology. This research is positioned within the wider field of critical discourse studies. It aims to analyze the anti-Roma hate speech narratives present on social media platforms and the related security implications for the targeted communities and their members, and it's using discourse analysis for this aim. The identified narratives are supported by case studies, which have been collecting from social media or other studies, but mostly originally from social media, and my own qualitative content analysis, which I conducted. Only if there have been very instrumental statements that have been found in secondary research, I use it, but mostly it's my own qualitative content analysis. And here are the different sections. So as I mentioned, it's quite a journey I took in this paper, but I really hope that it will be a good start for further research on this topic, which is very urgently needed. So the first section investigates anti-Roma narratives, their context and form, and supports them with the evidence of user-generated content examples. This analysis is focusing on the content present on social media platforms in written text, including posts and comments created by individual people, groups, and political figures. The cases have been selected to illustrate the common issues and overarching trends in hate speech that Roma face in the online spaces. These examples are then taken further and shown how they connect to offline violence, which has started on social media platforms or have been reinforced by social media platforms. And then I also include references to video content, which have been very important for these events. Section 2 highlights the direct and indirect security impacts on the affected people and the society as such. It offers examples of triggering events and high-risk environments with the potential for an escalation. Section 3 analyzes content moderation measures, assessing their current and potential form, and proposes steps for improvement. These steps, which I took further, they outline the main ideas which come from the security needs. And I will be speaking about what are the triggering events, why high-risk situations should be paid more attention to, how can they be prioritized in content moderation, etc. This is not all-encompassing list, and I will be very happy if we start more of a discussion about what other policy measures, what other measures in content moderation could be taken to improve the current frameworks which are in place. And the identified narratives in the third part are placed into a broader framework of challenges and tensions that platforms face in developing and applying content moderation to increase the protection of targeted communities. This case-based research design has been found effective for exploring the issues in focus. However, the limited number might have caused overgeneralizations. More research is needed to test the conclusions outlined in this article. And section 4 presents recommendations for improvements. It's based on 2 main overarching ideas. And one is, while improving the content moderation tools and practices, it's also important to layer them on each other. So none, as you will see, none is conclusively particularly able by itself to moderate the content. But I propose that if you layer them as a security, so you don't have a single point of vulnerability, they can actually create much safer environment than we have now. And while many of these measures have been already taken, they are not taken with victim-sensitive approach. They are taken with business approach, which is very natural because social media platforms are private companies, but because they become public resource, which can have such important security consequences, it's also needed to kind of revamp the focus of how content moderation is being applied. And then the conclusion emphasizes the need for deprioritizing engagement for stronger protection of the disproportionately affected people. I will start with section 1, but please feel free to interrupt. I hope that the moderators will let me know if there are any questions or any comments. I'm very, very happy to address them right away, or to hear your assessment, ideas, or any kind of feedback. I will start with section 1. So anti-Roma hate speech online, the context, form, and narratives. A little introduction. The Roma are Europe's largest ethnic minority. We approximately assume that there are 10 to 12 million people living on the continent. And they have been labeled as Europe's quintessential minority. And this is also very important for the as I said, like they find themselves on the sharp edge of content moderation, because they have been historically perceived as not belonging or integrating to the majority populations. And we'll see these narratives playing over and over. So the level of hostility is high across countries, but differs depending on the areas, with stronger negative views present in the areas with large Romani communities. This correlation is very important from the security standpoint and for addressing the real life harm of online hate speech. Because real life harm, what we mean by it, it's like real life intimidation or physical attacks on Roma. And these attacks have been mostly present in countries where there are large populations of Roma, and these populations are often spatially segregated. And in some areas, as I mentioned, for example, the region I come from, Eastern Slovakia, Roma are mostly in the eastern part and southeastern part, and often approximately 1/3 of Roma living in Slovakia lives in segregated settlements. And this means if anything happens online and there are offline repercussions, it can have repercussions for the whole community because they are very exposed to this hatred inflicted on them. And we'll speak about these examples, not in Slovakia, but in Ukraine, if time permitted. Recent years have also seen a rising wave of anti-Roma attitudes in the context of increasing prominence of far-right groups, growing xenophobic discourses. Anti-Roma hate speech also entered politics. It always actually been very connected to politics, and I will use some examples. But we see it more and more. I definitely seen it only on the national news. In 15 years, it has become more normalized to use anti-Roma language, and we see the same attitudes just then shifting and being broadcast in online spaces. Importantly, also with COVID-19 pandemic, this trend has been reinforced. Human rights organizations and national equality bodies have reported on alarming rise of anti-Roma sentiment because they were blamed for not adhering to quarantine measures, etc. So these attitudes are taken to online spaces, and hate can range from individual to organized and political statements. And in this way, especially when it's organized and when it's political speech, it helps to bring hateful manifestations to the online mainstream. I wanted to have this part included because I feel when we are discussing why rather drastic change in content moderation is needed, or deprioritization of business for security is needed, there is need for an argument. And going through these statements and conducting my own qualitative research on social media actually helped to understand just how serious the question is and how far it can go and how further it goes beyond permitted speech, or beyond speech that would be only considered as an opinion. So the most pervasive narratives can be clustered in several groups. Roma have been labeled as criminals and given thievish attributes, called dirty, beggars, thugs, and thieves, and criminalized minority in general. They have been equated to liars and making living by fraud, called uneducated and uncivilized. And these are not only single statements, these are the whole trends and narratives being repeated again and again after under each post which is mentioning Roma. And we see it, interestingly, also under articles would mention Roma from positive perspectives. So not necessarily only, for example, news mentioning any problems in this area, but also positive news about Roma children, etc. Even there, these narratives will be appearing in the conversations. Very pervasive is welfare chauvinism, which is, for example, which takes social issues such as begging, vagrancy, unemployment, or a low level of education, and treats them as traditional and inherent to Roma culture. Roma are presented as non-integratable and not participating in the majority society. And even the term inadaptables have been used, especially by politicians or other public figures, to speak about Roma, but avoid any repercussions for actually labeling a single minority group. We also see characterization of Roma as parasites and swindlers and taking advantage of social benefits. Roma women especially are exposed to multiple and intersecting discrimination, which is compounding hate through misogyny and anti-Roma attitudes together. Perceived double standards is a narrative which we often see, and it's reflected in hoaxes and disinformation materials, and often even organized disinformation campaigns taken further by far-right parties, for example, especially around critical moments such as elections. And by using this image of the conceptual gypsy and creating a shared mainstream identity, this helps this movement to justify unequal treatments of Roma. What have been on the very bottom of these expressions is putting or exposing Roma to dehumanizing language. Roma are framed as second-class and inferior citizens that are even perceived as a threat to order and a burden to society. And this is extremely dangerous language, because dehumanization as a process played a key role in Roma genocide during the Second World War by denying humanity to groups of people and constructing an image that they are not belonging to the same human or national community with the majority population. And dehumanizing posts portray alleged genetic or other inferiority of Romani people, mocking or supporting Roma Holocaust. Why this is important? Because these posts create huge damage for psychological safety, but also physical safety of targeted people and the whole communities. But also they are very difficult to be then. We'll discuss it with the content moderation tools, but they are very difficult when a mocking is used, ansata, or just kind of pointing to the direction of Roma genocide without spelling it out. It's very difficult for content moderation tools, whether it's especially algorithm models which are used at scale to flag this content and take it down from the platform. And for instance, the social media features posts comparing Roma with vermin, etc., leading to calls that the problem therefore should be treated accordingly, or contain calls for forced sterilization and genocide. And as we see, here we start with a content that can be directly related to security needs of people. I must say that this content, it's not, you don't have to search long to find content supporting these narratives or these kind of tropes, etc., because these ideas will be present widely on social media with issues connected to Roma. There are important references to the Nazi regime and posts explicitly calling for violence against Roma. References to what happened during that period are used as threats. For example, threats with gas chambers, which are proposed as a suitable solution for Roma, and calls for their physical extermination, concentration camps, everything evoking the genocide. One last thing, which from security perspective, I found especially important, because of the link it can create to offline security, is presenting Roma as a threat to safety and security to the mainstream society. They're mentioned as abnormal citizens unable to fit into mainstream society. This way, anti-Roma attitudes become normalized, legitimized, justifiable, and even socially acceptable. And framing Roma issues as a threat to public safety gives the ground for hate speech, suggesting that measures taken against them are necessary for ensuring public safety. And there is this emergence of reasonable anti-Roma sentiment. And it's based on the argument that the majority of society is rightfully entitled to act against Roma because they present a threat. And this can translate into concrete actions by individuals and hate groups, but also local authorities and the state. And I've seen on examples in Central Europe and in Southeastern Europe that there have been cases of police operations that disproportionately targeted Roma. And these neighborhoods during the pandemic experienced forced closures of whole settlements, and they illustrate how these narratives of disobeying or dirty or disease-transmitting Roma are still very present, and they re-emerge with every critical moment and renew vitality in times of crisis. I will go to section number 2. So if there are any hands up, any questions, I will be very happy to take them. So you get the space to ask questions in between rather than only at the end. And I will go to the second part, which is focused on security risks. So from hateful content, we see many harmful impacts of this online hate speech on victims and society as such. And there is also the link between online hate speech and offline hate crime. I would be very, very happy to hear your ideas on what is the correlation, because this is one of the very disputed topics, or the one I mentioned is not conclusively proven. But we do have many events which support the correlation between them, if not even coordination between them. So when it comes to harmful impacts, traditionally, who propagated anti-Roma hate speech in more organized manner are right-wing accounts and adherents to neo-Nazi ideology. Comments that speak about the incompetence of the police in sustaining public order are quite common. Also by far-right parties, and their representatives, so people who are quite public personas. And they incite people to take matters into their own hands to restore the social order. By doing so, the hate groups delegitimize state institutions and create a justification for violent actions. And you see this all across social media, especially when there is any kind of crime committed by Roma. It's taken, and this is definitely an issue for other minorities as such. But as I said, because the ostracization of Roma is at such high level, this has very many consequences. And we see it especially if any crime is committed by an individual, it's taken as proof that the whole community is in danger, and there will be many posts asking for or calling for violent actions, which are often unaddressed by the platforms. Public officials also employ racist rhetorics. Politicians at the local and national level tend to equate Roma with poverty, social issues, and crime in their online posts, and especially, as has been mentioned, around elections and other critical events. For example, in a reaction on a crime allegedly committed by a Roma man, Slovak right-wing parliamentarian included in his post the following appeal: I strongly recommend all people to get a gun license. The state simply cannot protect you. So here we see calls for offline action, which are spread online. Hateful content has a dual effect, and it's being said that it divides and unites at the same time. Because hate speech online sends two types of messages, and one is to stereotype, ridicule, diminish, or dehumanize targeted people, and the other is to find support for the hateful claims and build a group mentality. And this group mentality is especially dangerous when the crimes take offline. And this is happening by making a distinction between who is inside of the group and who is outside. Exposure to hate materials is also associated with a series of harmful impacts on the victims. It reinforces discrimination, which further worsens the economic and social situation. When there is stereotyping, it then becomes a whole circle. When there is a lot of stereotyping about a certain minority, this minority has issues to get employed. For example, they have problems to access social services or education for their kids, etc. They are being treated differently also in for example, medical centers and other public spaces. So this affects the members of these groups, their self-confidence and self-concept. Bias characteristics apply to the entire minority, support negative stereotypes and prejudices. This has important psychological and emotional harm It also further ostracizes and intimidates members of the targeted community and have the potential to increase inter-ethnic tensions. And with hate speech, we find the same attributes as with hate crime, for example. It's not a speech against, even if it's targeted on individual or community, etc. Whoever is the target, it simply stigmatizes the whole community. It also traumatizes the whole community. So it's rather a message sent against the community, and that's why it has wider effect than just a single bullying, let's say, not to weaken any cause, but it's simply a message to the whole community. And it also creates chilling effect. It's limiting online participation of Roma who then feel excluded even from online spaces, which have been created in a sense to be this space where everyone can participate. The display of online hate further creates a distinct form of victimization, as abuse is purposefully targeted at a collective identity and erodes trust in society and institutions. Members of the targeted groups are left navigating systems that excludes them. And they excludes them from safety to which they are entitled. They're expected to live lives, access public services, and raise their children in a social atmosphere which is poisoned by hateful and defamatory speech. And here we see listing some of the most harmful effects, or some of those which have been mapped in a research, and I've also seen in my work. And here we come to online hate speech taking offline consequences in a form of hate crimes. So there has been a mounting number of attacks on minorities, which has raised concerns about the connection between inflammatory speech online and violent acts. This is not a new phenomenon, but we have more evidence for the relationship between online and offline, and also more people are participating online. So already back in 2006, the OSCE acknowledged that hate crimes can be fueled by racist and other hateful content on the internet. In 2020, the UN Special Rapporteur on Minorities issues accused the propagation of hate speech through social media of contributing directly to the rise of hate crimes against minorities. As it has been said, the more hate speech is widespread, the more it becomes part of the mainstream and creates a permissive and toxic environment where calls for violence against the hated group, usually a minority, become normalized. And this propagation of hate against minorities online must be stopped. Violence attributed to online hate speech has increased worldwide, and we see it most noticeably with in other places and with other communities outside Europe, because hate groups became more pervasive on social media. They have been also more organized over the years to attract followers, organize demonstrations, and inspired acts of violence. At its most extreme, inflammatory speech online contributed to lynching and ethnic cleansing, such as the Facebook declared role in Myanmar's genocide. So this is one of the cases when even the platform itself came forward, saying that they had mismanaged the situation and they have contributing to the offline violence. Online hate speech that coincides with underlying tensions, trigger events, and other emerging conflicts and threats has an increased potential of being translating into offline harm. And I will refer to it when I'll be speaking about content moderation practices and what should be given a priority. That we know what are these triggering events, and we see where is this compounding compounding danger coming from, and then specific measures needs to be taken to stop it, to avoid escalation. So what are the situations? We have examples of one-off events which are connected to inter-ethnic tensions. For example, high engagement has been triggered by local events, such as new Roma camps emerging, or cases of community violence, police brutality, or connected, as I mentioned, to COVID-19 restrictions. Also in situations with high political stakes. And the evolution of hostility against Roma can be seen in three steps. So it starts with the report of an incident involving Roma people. It then follows by negative stereotypes being perpetuated, and then it escalates into hate speech calling for violence. And this can then enter the phase of offline violence. And why is it important? Because racist crimes against Roma are predominantly occurring in countries with large Romani populations. Many Roma communities live in settlements that are segregated with minimum standard of housing and infrastructure. Their living conditions make them a vulnerable target in case of racially motivated violence. And I will go to some of the examples. I'll not dive too deep because of the time limitation we have today, but please feel free to ask me questions about specific events if you are interested in more details. So one of these cases I mentioned in my paper are attacks on Roma temporary settlements in 2018 in Ukraine. Ukrainian attacks included at least 7 attacks on the Romani community starting in April 2018, which were defined by online violence that went hand in hand with offline violence from far-right groups. There was an element of theater to most of these attacks, which were live streamed on social media. And in this way, they have been furthering the echo chambers of hate speech against Romani people. The second case, similar to this one, took place in Italy on the outskirts of Rome in April 2019. A neo-Nazi movement took the initially online hatred and fear into inciting a riot outside of a shelter. A mob set fire to cars outside the social shelter that was housing Romani families. The third case I mentioned in my paper is pointing to the danger of fake news. And it was demonstrated in March 2019 in Paris suburbs. So the mob set fire to vehicles belonging to Romani people, attacked the makeshift camp that people were living in, and chased after a group of Roma in the nearby suburbs to the point that they were forced to hide to escape the violence. The incident was one of the 25 attacks against Romani communities sparked by a series of viral hoax videos claiming to show Roma in white vans abducting children. These cases of spontaneous acts of violence against several different Romani communities with elements of coordinated campaign show how the old myth of Roma as child abductors resurfaces in Europe today. There are several considerations coming from these events. And while the causality between online hate speech and offline hate crime has not been proven, these and similar attacks indicate a link between the events where hate speech and social media play part in radicalizing and mobilizing part of society. And what also stands at the bottom of my motivation for writing this paper is that by understanding the context and the differentiated impacts and level of harm when dealing with hateful content, we can move the discussion to a proactive exercise of mitigating the associated risks. We just need to map what is actually happening with the hate speech and what are the consequences of the hate present online. Now I will speak about the challenges and tensions of content moderation as such. I put it into three.
Sorry, can I jump in for one moment and ask one of those questions in between sections that we promised before? Give you a chance to take a drink of water, as I probably should have done myself. But I was particularly sort of struck by your citing 2019 hoax videos as one of the prompts that led to from online depictions to offline violence. That seems like something that is a fairly direct link between the online and the offline, and it's something that we've seen elsewhere in the world, including the violence against Rohingya in Myanmar. Often, their hoax videos were played a large part of that. And so I was wondering if you're aware of. I know a lot of your research was from that 2018-2019 era, but as we've sort of moved into, especially in the last few months, a sort of AI era of online content creation, has there been an acceleration, or do you think there might be an acceleration in Romani people? Is this something that you've noticed, or merely something to keep one's eyes out for, or I guess I'm sort of wondering, is the pace of technology making this more easier in your perspective?
It's a very good question. I'm not aware of that like innovative technology would be used for spreading hoaxes. It's also, I think, it's just something to give it a time, because for sure, as I said, like there's a lot of organic hate speech happening, and just and then snowballing, but there are also organized and coordinated movements. So these movements can definitely go into these technologies to support creation of hoaxes. But this, sadly enough, to spur such hatred, these hoaxes, they don't need to be sophisticated. They don't need like fake videos, etc. Because what is the term for it? When they use the face and then they put into another voice, etc. As it was used in disinformation campaigns of geopolitical geopolitical importance. So these are highly sophisticated. Hoaxes targeting Roma, because they have such they are not of geopolitical importance. They are of importance to small groups. Right. They're also not so elaborated, and they are already. What is also danger of normalizing hate speech? They are already targeting group which is very receptive. So for them, it's enough to make up a hoax about what one of the popular ones was that the Roma were receiving free, when they were quarantined, there was forced closure of the settlement in Slovakia, that they were receiving food for free. A single picture. It was a real picture. The food was paid for, but they simply say the opposite, right? They say something is for free. And because people are already so receptive to this kind of information, because of the historical kind of stereotypes against Roma, they don't need more proof. They don't need more advanced videos, etc. I think we'll see. If I could, give any assessment, we'll see this. I'm not aware that it would be used. We have been, but videos as such, like video evidence showing something, and we have it in any kind of disinformation. It will be a blurry video. It will be a, half recognizable picture, etc. With a caption attached, and it's enough to spur violence. So I think, yes, AI as such have not been used widely. Probably there will be cases, but we are not facing sophisticated campaigns in this
Right.
in this regard.
It sounds like a lot of the campaigns are essentially local in nature rather than transnational, which is sort of an interesting twist. I'm anxious to hear about the content moderation, so I'll ask you to forge ahead in a second. But there was another question that popped up from one of our attendees, asking you if you could speak to the gendered racism of hate speech targeting Roma peoples. Is there do you find a gendered element in the instances of online hate speech that you find? I mean, not exclusively, but certainly.
Yes, there is definitely. So just to jump in to close the point to your question, when you say about localized violence or localized hate speech and localized movements, that's exactly it, because the most kind of hate crimes we see starting online, such as the ones in Ukraine, but also Italy, Paris, and Sata, these are local, especially what spurred also the most demonstrations and physical acts of violence against Roma have been, for example, local settlements. So these issues are very local, and they are, and especially local people in areas where there are Roma settlements can get kind of into this like mob violence mentality very fast, because it's very sensitive topic for them. So we definitely don't see anything, of geopolitical consequence, but we see very localized events. But these events, and this is very important for content moderation, because that's exactly why social media platforms don't pay that much attention to it. They don't prioritize that much because it's of local consequence, but it's of a high, it's very high price that these people are paying for online speech happening against them. So just to conclude on this point, and yes, when it comes to intersectional hate speech, we definitely see it with Roma women. There is the most recurring narrative is of them having many kids. It's not something specific to Romani people, as we know. Many minorities face these stereotypes, but Romani women as having many kids because of the welfare benefits is one of the most present. There have been some truly appalling hate crimes, especially against single women of Romani origin who have been singled out by the attackers because of the vulnerability of women to to physical attacks as such, especially by mobs, or and these incidents, not recalling instances which would start online, but definitely we have seen many, and we have them in our databases. We have seen incidents where there have been violence against a woman, for example, even by, I recall exact case of bus driver who have basically got out and beaten a Romani woman, and it was spread over social media by these groups to call for, to basically justify the action and call for more violence against them. So Romani women have been exposed to this compounding hate, putting together misogyny and anti-Roma attitudes.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that answer. And let's see, I realize we're at the top of the hour again. So I'll pass it back to you to address these content moderation issues, which I think is an exciting part of your paper. So please go on.
Thank you very much. So I split them into three parts. One is on community standards as such. So the policies which the platforms use. The second part is on artificial intelligence, because this is used to police the online content at scale. And while we need to speak about AI models, because they definitely are a must in content moderation, it's not possible because of the sheer amount of content to moderate it otherwise. They also have many limitations which are very important, especially in considerations on what constitutes hate speech. And then we have other examples of human content moderators, users reporting and deranking content and amplifying content. So jumping into community standards. Social media platforms, and this is overarching themes for why this issue is also so problematic, is that they are private companies. As such, they can enforce the internal rules which are not known to the public, and they are commonly referred to as community standards to determine what constitutes hate speech and what is the content that should be reduced. So the company's guidelines generally prohibit hate speech, bullying, harassment, violence, and incitement. Hate speech is understood as a direct attack against people that share protected characteristics. This is including ethnicity, race, or nationality. For example, Facebook defines 7 types of attacks that it considers hate speech, and it calls for exclusion, calls for violence, calls for segregation, calls for degrading generalization, dismissing, cursing, and slurs. So this is the official line. But what we see is piecemeal implementation of these measures. Because all of these examples, which are in their official policy standards, and it must be said that these standards are only like the baseline, the backbone of what is being done. This is the official strategy. And then the action plan is discussed with human moderators who are moderating the content and deciding on the content. And there have been found important discrepancies, which then answers why we still have content which calls for exclusion, calls for violence, present on social media platforms. There are some important considerations and limitations for the private companies themselves. They operate across jurisdictions, which means that national legislation systems include various interpretations of hate speech. And even under, when it comes to these interpretations, what is important also for overarching legislation and policies, for example, on the level of the European Union, when it comes to issue of anti-Roma hate speech in Europe, they never define hate speech. They refer to national frameworks having hate speech defined. And this is based on the national legal, political, historical, cultural, and societal traditions. There are many examples of how different hate speech approaches to hate speech are. Important differences between the US legal framework, where the social media platforms mostly originate from and are headquartered in, and the European legal tradition. There are several policy initiatives on hate speech. Especially interesting for me when I was researching was the Rabat Plan of Action, because then this one considers the context of the statement, the speaker's position or the status, intent to incite audience against targeted group, content and form of the statement, extent of its dissemination, and likelihood of harm, including its imminence. So I found this very much telling about how content moderation of hate speech could be taken further, and what could be some of the considerations that social media companies take. What is very relevant in regard to Romani people, and I found this judgment instrumental, is the case law of the International Court of the Council of Europe, which has broad focus on the many contextual factors of hate speech, such as the wider discourse in which a statement was made, the author, aim, value, and accuracy of the statement. In a decision that could serve as an inspiration for social media platforms, the court says or it has identified several groups through its case law, including Roma, and that requires that groups, the court says, require special protection. In this framework, the court has said that as a result of their turbulent history and constant uprooting, the Roma have become a specific type of disadvantaged and vulnerable minority, and the Roma people therefore require special protection. This approach can be considered a victim-sensitive approach, for which I argue as part of this paper, as it gives a special focus to the victims and acknowledges that they are disproportionately affected. And this is something we still don't see being prioritized in content moderation, despite the overwhelming evidence that there is. However, differentiated and context-sensitive approach comes across the private actors who want to provide a uniform product. So unified or uniform product is something that they seek globally. Also, minority and marginalized communities face enormous challenges to be heard by the US-based decision makers. And this is something which, again, was an important motivation to shed light on this particular group and its needs, because similar approaches should be, and they are being applied, and more of a research is contributing to the recognition that there are specific groups on the sharp end of decision-making on content, and they need to be considered as a litmus test rather than social media companies only focusing on having their uniform product, and also having basically the virality of their post, of their content ensured, the time that people spend on social media, and then the profit. Platforms try to reconcile their business mission with the growing levels of hate speech circulating online, and the more evidence there will be for special protection of certain groups, the more there is hope for change. When it comes to enforcing community standards, companies rely on a combination of AI, users reporting, and content moderators. However, in practice, the social media landscape continues to be populated with posts which are against this. And this shows that whatever they're using is insufficient, or the standards, the internal standards itself, are not made with regard to protection of people. So the official basic standards on one side and the detailed instructions on the other side have been found to have many discrepancies. And investigations into trainings of content moderators show that there have been different practices that are publicly proclaimed by the companies, and different things they are saying as part of their public promotion. What is important, even when reported by human rights defenders who are specifically working on Roma issues, the reported content was kept on the platforms despite repeatedly asked to be taken down. When it comes to artificial intelligence itself, considering the amount of content to moderate, platforms must use advanced solutions to scale moderation. What is commonly used are automated hash matching and predictive machine learning tools. It must be said that these tools has been improving, but they still have very important limitations. Algorithmic decision-making cannot avoid the fact that deciding what constitutes hate speech or harmful speech essentially involves value judgment. Societal norms, history, political situations, triggers, and values that may be shifting over time are all extremely relevant for tracing anti-Roma narratives and evaluating the probability and extent of harm. And this judgment needs to be done ex ante. So AI models face a series of technical, impact-related, and accountability problems. They are vulnerable to manipulation and bias, and it has been suggested that especially because of the accountability issues, when they are being developed and deployed, they need human in the loop. One of the key concerns is the opacity of algorithmic systems. So there are multiple factors which can influence how they act, and it depends on the data it's trained on, the way they are labeled, and the input that is being evaluated that by itself can be biased. Detecting language, and I find it very important with the narratives I've been mentioning before, that detecting language has proven remarkably difficult, and concerns have been raised about the performance, robustness, generalizations, and fairness of the algorithmic models. So language is very difficult, and pictures and videos add to this complexity to be recognized by AI models. So hate speech needs contextual and linguistical clues to determine whether a particular word, phrase, or sentence are acceptable in selected posts or comments. It can escape the formalized language by including purposefully spelling mistakes. It can be also circumvented by using mocking and suggestive language, such as mentioned historical references to genocide. It can also use neutral words as dehumanizing slurs. Very often when I was going through the content, it says monkeys, trash, vermin, parasite. These all not necessarily mean anything derogatory, but used in this context, they can constitute hate speech. Words can also have opaque meanings, and the basic ethnonym gypsy and its derivatives are, for example, the most productive words among the posts marked as negative, and which should be removed. However, it's not much the frequency of use of the words that should be analyzed as their context and emotional coloration. And I find this very important because gypsy is a word widely used, but the ethnonym is used to emphasize the negative attitudes towards Roma, and often serves for stereotyping and as a verbal abuse. But at the same time, the word has been reclaimed by Roma people to show pride in their culture by using this term. So programming AI to flag or delete posts that include word gypsy as hate speech would end up in stifling minority voices. And there is important consideration for limiting minority voices and the discriminatory impacts which too aggressive content moderation can have. In this sense, then I continue with emphasizing events where the line between basically the danger between deleting the context, where is the line? Where is the line between what is better solution? So determining whether the risk of inaction is greater than the preventive action depends on numerous factors in which the local context is of key importance. And we have been speaking about triggering events which have potential for escalating into ethnic tensions, and especially it has been mentioned today, the local context of this. Because we are approaching our time, I will move to other content moderation solutions. I will not elaborate too much on human content moderators. There have been important issues raised. They can be biased themselves. There have been, for example, the case of in Ukraine, where actually far-right leaning company have been hired to provide content moderation of hate speech. So humans can have bias themselves. They need to be trained and issue-based trained for moderating content. But Also, there has been raised important issues to the conditions in they're working in, and PTSD. It's very difficult to review content, and doing it over time at scale has long-term consequences on people. But of course, when it's taken just the sheer amount of a content, it cannot rely only on human moderators. Then there's user reporting. So I suggest that there would be more kind of both ways communication. One way is improving the ties with or collaboration with human rights organizations who are specified in these topics, and giving them these like trusted flaggers rights. It has been done, but it's not being done on a really important scale. It's more done as a thinking exercise of, we have done this and we cooperate. But it can also, the other way, these cooperation between stakeholders can inform the companies about what is actually happening. Because many times, and that's why I focus on Roma who have these like mostly localized issues, even though they are in these regional issues are then taken place in many countries, is that these issues may not be known, and in this way they can inform the processes both ways. The third is very important, especially for the security considerations, and this is deranking and amplification, because they are not only binary decisions in content moderation. Platforms can regulate the overall flow of posts. These kinds of decisions are extremely important in high-risk situations. When heightened social tension is detected, the moderation can promote reliable information and reduce the distribution and virality, so that content on the side moves more slowly than usual. And this strategy is a very effective way of dealing with hate speech. It includes controlled lower engagement rates, and distribution of hate speech have proven of vital importance. There has been examples where, for example, the Facebook platforms has been using it, and very successfully. The thing is that it's very resource. It's very difficult on resources. It needs many resources to be invested in knowing the situation. So they have been using it only for very prominent events. But if they can use it for prominent events, they can use it also in other circumstances which are life-threatening or security-threatening for marginalized communities. Additionally, in situations of rising tensions, the platforms can restrict censorship decisions to local users through geo-blocking. And as local community violence is such an important factor in translating online hate speech to offline hate crime, this is one of the proposed solutions in the paper. In this way, the platforms can make important exceptions in situations of escalating violence. What is important in this whole list of proposals is that such models goes against the virality on engagement that offline platforms otherwise enable and build their business models on. So these algorithms maximize viewing times and engagement, which inadvertently promote extremist content. So basically, as I was mentioning, these kind of things are resource heavy, but also they go against this business model. That's why they have not been taken on a scale. But as a public resource, social media need to also step into their role. And as they have been not stepping themselves, there have been more regulation from the point of different countries and different blocs, such as the European Union. I do believe that online environment can be built safer if the existing models of content moderation are improved. and layered, with each layer extending the security and counterveiling the limitations of the other. While some of the tools are already in place, their applicability and consequential efficiency have been hindered by numerous factors, such as the lack of attention to the impact of hate speech on different ethnic communities and in diverse environments, or limited cooperation between groups of stakeholders, limited transparency and accountability issues, which are pervasive in social media. And then there is the resulting legitimacy deficit on content. It's not clear for the accounts which have been taken down, for the content which have been taken down, or the content which is staying on the platform despite being flagged by different groups, individual users, or human rights organizations, which is still being present there. And simply, yes, causing this legitimacy deficit. So social media platforms can improve policing of the online content if they prioritize the detection of the most harmful and inflammatory segments, as these have imperative impact on people's safety and security. And some of these we have been mentioning, such as retaliatory, such as hate speech, which is as part of triggering events, also the humanizing language in high-risk environments, around critical events, around inter-ethnic violence. These are all lessons learned from the example of Roma communities, which can be taken further for platform moderation globally. And as I say in the paper, the platforms that impact globally must start moderating locally by recognizing and acting on the differences and sensitivities across local contexts. The focus should be on identifying coordinating harm and movements, applying a spectrum of counter interventions to limit the visibility and availability of hate speech, and enforcing stronger protection for affected groups prior to conflict escalations. This research also calls for more research and in-depth research into the impacts of content moderation on different communities. And what we need for content and what we need in cyberspace and in online spaces in general is understanding and developing the methods to measure harm caused to targeted and affected populations. We still don't have a methodology which could assess what is the harm beyond harm of the physical beyond the financial harm which is being caused and harm to data. We still don't have this kind of component of harm to society and to people stemming from these places. There are some considerations I would like to share, but if there is any question, now would be the time, as we are running out of time.
I'm excuse me, happy to moderate questions, as I've said before. Actually, why don't you take this moment to go through the considerations, and if someone does have a question, please feel free to pop it either in the chat or the Q&A, and I will relay it to Pavlina as soon as possible.
Thank you. So one of these is social media companies have become publicity sources, but they are still operated as private companies. Also, regulating private actors with public responsibilities has proven difficult, but states have approached the regulations at speed in the past years. I will not go into details how positive or negative this is. It's with very mixed results. It's just to say that the era of self-regulation for social media companies is over, and we have to look forward of focus on what is in front of us and how to bring improvements. What is important, whether we speak about any kind of regulation coming from internal motivation or external legislation, there is an urgent need to deepen understanding of these companies, of the multiple and interconnected problems in the online environment. And the era of just building things without really looking at the impact they cause is over. And even for their own benefit, starting to regulate the content better through the means they already have, but actually enforcing the standards they have in place, but only publicly, while saying the other things to the content moderators and programming AI in a way that it does not really enforce the official standards. It would be to their own benefit and benefit of their users. Effective platform governance must engage with the communities that are on the sharp edge of their content decisions. And we had the saying, working on Roma issues is always for Roma, with Roma. You cannot decide on minority needs and needs of marginalized people without incorporating them into these decisions. Having their rights and security needs disproportionately affected compared to average users. As I say in the paper, platforms need to consider the specific circumstances of vulnerable people and also employ a victim-sensitive approach to content moderation. And some of the conclusions: hate speech is not confined to Roma in Europe. It's a global problem. An example of Romani communities represents some of the most marginalized groups with some of the most offline consequences. But it can be applicable across different groups in different positions, especially in positions of vulnerability. Building a safer social media ecosystem will inevitably include trade-offs. And this is very kind of stealing the motivation from being extremely proactive on content moderation, even though it's really not justified, because there will be trade-offs. There is never, for global content moderation, etc., there is not a unified, for example, approach to or definition of what exactly are the hate speech statements which should be taken down, or what should be the unified response, unless we are speaking about broad strokes of policy measures. So there will be trade-offs and there will be deficiencies always, because no model will be perfect. But if we remove the single point of vulnerability, if we remove the over-reliance of one solution on the expense of the other, and really follow the standards which are being publicly proclaimed, which are also listed today, we will see much better content regulation, which will create much safer spaces. And we have to predominantly focus on marginalized groups such as Roma, because they are the litmus test of whether something is working or not. Looking only on the general population, which is not being specifically targeted, will not give us the full picture. And this is the quote I already mentioned today, but I find it as like overarching over the paper itself, that understanding the context and the differentiated impacts and the levels of harm when dealing with hateful content can move the discussion to a proactive exercise of mitigating the associated risks. And this is something we need to do as a society, to move to from ignoring the problems to mapping the problems, and then to finding solutions together. So with this, I would like to thank you.
I really appreciate the time that you put into this, and your willingness to be here this afternoon or this evening where you are. I especially appreciate your conclusions that trade-offs are necessary, because I think far too often we have this discussion about content moderation, and it's between camps that are unyielding on their principles, free speech above all, or all censor all words that ring a bell. And of course, neither of those are viable, and yet it's sort of startling how I think without the kind of thought that you've put into it, people will just anchor themselves to the kind of absolutist positions. So one thing that I really appreciate about your paper and your presentation today is that you create this space for a conversation that urgently needs to be had. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. I know we still have some participants who are here and may wish to ask a question. I think now is your last chance to do so. Although Pavlina has made her contact details available on the paper when it is published later this week on the gsp.yale.edu website. I encourage you to read the whole thing there and follow up with her if you do have more questions. And furthermore, this is a topic that the Genocide Studies Program and the Mass Atrocities in the Digital Era initiative will be continuing to address, hopefully in concert with scholars and activists and people with keeping an eye on this, like Pavlina. If you do have more questions about that, about our efforts here at the Genocide Studies Program, please feel free to reach out with those as well. Okay, seeing no further questions at this moment, I think we'll call it to a close. And we'll conclude the recording. But not before I say one more time, thank you very much for your thoughts, your presence, your presentation. You've given a lot for all of us to think about, and I think are addressing a extraordinarily important topic at just the right time. So thank you again.
Thank you.